She called me from a gas station payphone. I didn't even know those still existed. I was in the middle of repotting a fern when my cell rang, unknown number, Illinois area code. I almost didn't pick up. But something made me set down the trowel and answer. Mom. Her voice was so small I barely recognized it. I need you to come. My daughter-in-law's name is Suzanne. She married my son 16 years ago in a backyard ceremony in Naperville with string lights and too much potato salad and my late husband crying through the whole thing. I loved her before she even said her vows. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened to you, really listened, like whatever you were saying was the most important thing she'd ever heard. She was calling from a gas station 40 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio. She had my grandson with her. He'd just turned 9. What happened? I asked. I was already moving toward my car keys. She told me she'd been asked to leave. That's how she said it. Asked to leave. Like it had been polite. Like someone had held a door open for her. What had actually happened was that my son's mother, his other mother, the one he chose to listen to, had walked into the house Suzanne shared with my son, handed her a manila envelope, and told her that her services were no longer required. Those were the exact words. Services no longer required. As if Suzanne had been a contractor. As if 16 years of marriage and 1 child and 2 miscarriages and a mortgage were a service agreement that had simply expired. I told her to stay where she was. I told her I was coming. The drive from my house in Evanston to that gas station took me 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the quiet to keep myself from doing something I'd regret before I even got there. My name is Miriam. I'm 63 years old. I taught high school English for 27 years. I have seen every variety of cruelty that human beings are capable of, and I learned a long time ago that the loudest response is rarely the most effective one. My mother used to say, the river doesn't argue with the rock. It just keeps moving until the rock isn't there anymore. I thought about that the whole drive down. Suzanne was sitting on the curb outside the gas station with my grandson beside her, his backpack between his feet, eating a granola bar. When I pulled in, he stood up and shielded his eyes against my headlight. He looked so much like my son at that age that something in my chest pulled tight. I parked and got out and didn't say anything. I just opened my arms, and Suzanne walked into them and stayed there for a long moment. She didn't cry. She was past crying. That's the thing about women who have been worn down slowly. They don't arrive at breaking points in tears. They arrive in silence. Grandma, my grandson said, tugging my sleeve. Mom said we're going on a trip. That's right, I said. We are. I got them both into the car. I bought him a hot chocolate from inside and a bottle of water for Suzanne, and I didn't ask her any questions until he'd fallen asleep in the back seat with his head against his backpack. Then she told me everything. Her name is Vivienne, my son's mother, the other woman in his life, and I say that without bitterness. I say it as a statement of fact, because facts are what matter. Vivienne Aldborn had been the dominant force in my son's world since long before I came into the picture. She is the kind of woman who enters a room and rearranges the furniture simply by being in it. Everything shifts to accommodate her. My son's name is Christopher. He's 41. He's a good man. I believe that genuinely. But he was raised in a particular way, in a household where love was conditional and approval was currency, and he never fully shook it. Even after his father died and he moved to Columbus for work and married Suzanne and built a life that was technically his own, there was always a version of him that remained 11 years old, standing in Vivienne's kitchen, wishing to see if he'd done something wrong. Suzanne had known this when she married him. She'd made her peace with it. What she hadn't anticipated was how much worse it would get once they had a child. The pregnancy changed things. It was supposed to bring the families closer together, I think. That's the hope, anyway. Instead, it gave Vivienne a new target, a new project. She had opinions about the birth plan, the name, the pediatrician, the sleep schedule, the nursery colors. She called Christopher 3 times a day. She arrived unannounced on weekday afternoons. She brought gifts that were really directives wrapped in tissue paper. Suzanne endured it because Christopher asked her to, because he said she means well and she's just excited and please don't make this harder than it needs to be. That last sentence was the one that did the damage. Every time he said it, he was choosing. And the choice was never Suzanne. When my grandson was 2, Vivienne offered Suzanne's a job. Now, I need you to understand what Suzanne's situation was at that point. She had a degree in accounting. She'd left her position at a mid-sized firm in Columbus when the baby came, with the plan to return part-time once he started preschool. But then the pandemic hit. and the firm downsized, and when Suzanne was ready to go back, the position simply wasn't there. She freelanced for a couple of years, but it was inconsistent. She wanted stability. Vivian owned a property management company. Nothing enormous, about 40 units spread across 2 complexes in the Columbus suburbs, but it was profitable and well-run, and she had been doing it herself for years. She offered Suzanne the role of office manager, health insurance, a real salary, 12 weeks of paid leave if they had another child. Suzanne said yes. What else could she have done? I didn't like it when I heard about it. I said so to Christopher exactly once. He told me I was being negative. I didn't say it again, but I kept my mouth shut and I kept watching. What Vivian had done, I understood immediately, was create a situation in which she controlled everything. My daughter-in-law's income, her health coverage, her daily schedule, her professional reputation. And because the job was family, because you don't just quit family, Suzanne couldn't leave without it becoming a crisis, without it becoming the thing that broke the marriage. She was pinned. For 6 years, Suzanne worked for Vivian. She was good at it. She organized the leasing process, handled the tenant communications, managed the maintenance schedules, kept the books. The company ran better with her than it ever had before. She knew it. I knew it. Even Vivian knew it, though she would never say so. What Vivian said instead, at the end of those 6 years standing in the kitchen of the house my son paid the mortgage on, was, "I've decided to restructure. Your position is being eliminated. You'll receive 2 weeks severance." 2 weeks. After 6 years. And then, because apparently that wasn't enough, I've also spoken to Christopher. We both feel it would be best if you had some time to get your head straight. We've arranged for Marcus. Wait, I said, from the back seat. Suzanne had turned around to look at me while she talked. I'd pulled over in a rest stop parking lot so I could really listen. She said we both feel. Yes, Christopher agreed to this. A long pause. He didn't disagree, Suzanne said. I've been a mother for 41 years. I know the difference between a man who makes a mistake and a man who makes a choice. What Christopher did in that kitchen, or rather what he didn't do, was a choice. He let his mother hand his wife a manila envelope and call it restructuring. He let her use the word we as if they were a unit, as if Suzanne were the outsider. Vivian had also, Suzanne told me, suggested that my grandson stay with Christopher for the time being, just until things settled, just until Suzanne found her footing. It's better for his routine, she'd said. That was when Suzanne had walked out of the house with 2 bags and a 9-year-old who didn't fully understand what was happening and driven until the gas was running low and called me. I stayed quiet for a moment after she finished. Where is my grandson supposed to be right now? I asked. With Christopher, Suzanne said. He was supposed to drop him at school this morning, but I took him to me when I left. I nodded. Good, I said. I want to be clear about something. I have nothing against Vivian as a human being. I never wished her ill. What I had against her was specific and evidentiary. It was about what she had done to my daughter-in-law over 6 years, and what she was doing to my son by keeping him dependent, and what both of those things were doing to the child sleeping in my back seat. I had also, as it happened, spent the better part of 3 years quietly gathering documentation. This is the part Christopher never knew. This is the part Vivian never imagined. When Suzanne took the job 6 years ago, I was worried. Not in a vague maternal way, in a specific practical way. I had seen this arrangement before. A relative employing another relative under terms that were never properly formalized. No written contract, no HR documentation, no paper trail, just a handshake and a salary deposited twice a month. The kind of setup that looks like generosity but functions like a trap. So I made some calls. I have a friend. We have been friends since we were both 24 and teaching at the same school and splitting a parking pass because neither of us could afford one on our own. She went on to become an employment attorney. I asked her to help me understand hypothetically what Suzanne's rights would look like in various scenarios. We talked about it over coffee. We talked about it again a year later. We talked about it the Christmas that Vivian told Suzanne she needed to dress more professionally for a job where she worked from home. I also started keeping notes, not secretly, exactly. I kept a journal, I always have, but I started writing down specific things, dates, things Suzanne mentioned to me, times Christopher repeated things his mother had said, small incidents, the Christmas incident, the time Vivian told Suzanne that her filing system was chaotic and redid 3 months of organized records without telling her. The time she referred to my grandson in front of Suzanne as Christopher's son, as if Suzanne had had nothing to do with him. I also kept the emails. Suzanne had a habit of forwarding me things, just to vent, I think, or to check if she was overreacting. Am I crazy? She'd type. Does this seem weird? I'd read them and respond, and then I'd print them out and file them. I have a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom. My late husband used to tease me about it. He said I was the only person he knew who still printed emails. I told him they don't lose power in a filing cabinet. He passed 4 years ago. He would have been very useful in this situation. What I had by the time Suzanne called me from that gas station was a file. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a thriller. It was just paper. But paper in the right hands with the right framing can change the shape of a situation entirely. I called my friend from the rest stop parking lot while Suzanne used the restroom and my grandson slept. I told her what had happened. I told her about the 6 years and the 2 week severance and the phrase services no longer required. I told her about the lack of a written employment agreement. I told her about the emails. My friend was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Miriam, how much documentation do you have? A lot, I said. Another pause. She's going to want to talk to me. I know, I said. I'll have her call you in the morning. I drove the rest of the way to my house in Evanston with a clearer head than I'd had in years. The next few weeks were quiet on the surface. Suzanne and my grandson stayed in my guest room. He enrolled in a temporary school placement nearby. Suzanne spoke to my friend. Her name is Beverly, though I'll call her my attorney friend if you don't mind, because this isn't her story, and the two of them began building a case. Christopher called me twice, the first time to ask where Suzanne was. I told him she was safe. I told him she would be in touch when she was ready. He asked me if I thought he'd done something wrong. I said I thought he'd been put in a very difficult position for a very long time, and that I loved him and that I would talk to him more when the time was right. He didn't push back. He was raised to accept calm authority, and in that moment I was offering him some. The second time he called, he sounded different, smaller. He said his mother had told him that Suzanne was making threats, that she was going to file some kind of claim, that it was all very dramatic and that he needed to manage his wife. Manage, I repeated. That's the word she used, he said. Christopher, I said, I need you to think about something, not for me, for yourself. When is the last time you made a decision about your own life that your mother didn't have a role in shaping? He didn't answer, but he stayed on the line for a long time. What happened next happened because Vivienne made a mistake. This is usually how it goes. Not some grand strategic move on the part of the person who was wronged, but a miscalculation by the person who thought they were untouchable. What Vivienne did was contact Suzanne's former employer, the accounting firm, and tell them that Suzanne had left her position with the property management company due to performance issues. She did this, as best we could determine, because she was trying to prevent Suzanne from using the job as a reference. She wanted to poison the well before Suzanne could draw from it. What she did not know was that Suzanne had a very good relationship with one of the partners at that firm. He had been the one who let her go during the downsizing. He'd written her a letter at the time, a real letter, paper and ink, and when Vivienne called him with her version of events, he called Suzanne immediately to tell her. He also, bless him, kept notes. My attorney friend added his account to the file. We now had something that looked very much like defamation. We also had, once the employment attorney reviewed everything, a solid claim for unpaid wages. Suzanne had regularly worked hours that were never recorded and never compensated. We had emails proving that Vivienne knew this and had on at least 2 occasions explicitly told Suzanne not to log certain tasks because they were just part of being family. That phrase, just part of being family, turned out to be extremely useful in a legal context. I'll spare you the procedural details because they're not the interesting part. What's interesting is what happened in Vivienne's lawyer's office on a Wednesday afternoon in March when Vivienne sat across a conference table from Suzanne and my attorney friend and realized, I could see the exact moment it landed, that the manila envelope she'd handed over 6 weeks ago was going to cost her significantly more than 2 weeks of severance. Vivienne looked across the table at Suzanne and then slowly at me. I had come because Suzanne asked me to. I sat in the corner and said nothing. I didn't need to say anything. I watched Vivienne's face move through several expressions. First dismissal, she had expected this to be quick, a formality, a small concession, and then done. Then recognition as my attorney friend walked through the documentation, then something that was almost respect, which surprised me. She looked at me, and I think she understood, maybe for the first time, that I had been paying attention for years. It was settled out of court. The amount is private. What I can tell you is that it was more than 2 weeks severance. It was significantly more. It covered the gap in Suzanne's retirement contributions, the unpaid hours, something my attorney friend called non-economic damages, and the legal costs. It was enough for Suzanne to get her footing, to get an apartment, to return to accounting with a reference letter from a man who respected her. Christopher came to see me 2 weeks after the settlement. He sat at my kitchen table where he'd sat 1,000 times before, where he'd done homework and eaten cereal and cried when he got his driver's license and cried harder when his father died, and he looked at me for a long time. "You did all of that," he said. Not a question, not accusatory, just a fact he was placing on the table between us. "I kept a file," I said. "Suzanne did the hard part. I didn't protect her," he said. "I didn't argue. I also didn't comfort him. Some things a person has to sit with." "Is she going to take me back?" he asked. "That's not a question for me," I said. "That's a question you have to earn the right to ask her." He nodded. Then he said, "Mom, when did you start keeping the file?" I thought about it. "About a month after she took the job," I said, "when Vivian showed up at their house to rearrange the kitchen cabinets and called it helping." He was quiet. Then, "I thought you were just being protective." "I was," I said. "I was being protective of the woman you chose. I was protecting her from the slow thing, the thing that's hard to see while it's happening." He looked at his hands. "It starts with small comments," I said. "A canceled plan. A job offer that sounds like generosity. A word like we used by someone who means I. And then one day you're standing in a gas station parking lot with 2 bags and a child, and you don't know what happened. You just know something has been taken. My grandson is doing well. He started a new school and he loves his teacher, and he has made 2 friends already, which at 9 years old is all that matters. Suzanne found an apartment on the north side of Columbus. She started at her new firm in April. She is good at her job. She has always been good at her job. Christopher is in therapy. This is new for him. I'm told it's going well. He and Suzanne are talking, not reconciling, not yet, maybe not ever, but talking, taking it in pieces, which is the only honest way to handle something that was broken slowly. Vivienne has not called me. I don't expect her to. I don't have anything against her still. What I have is a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom and the patience of someone who taught teenagers for 27 years and learned that the best way to handle a bully is not to match their volume. It's to keep your notes. Because one day there will be a conference table and a folder, and a face that finally understands it has been seen. That's all I wanted. Not revenge, exactly. Something quieter than that. Just the truth, documented, presented, undeniable, laid out in plain language so that no one could look away from it. The river doesn't argue with the rock. My mother was right about that. It just keeps moving until the rock isn't there anymore.